Hello, my name's Tim Harmon. I'm Century Furniture Upholstery Plant 2 plant manager. I've been in the upholstery business about 42 years. I've been at Century 18. This is Billy Tolbert. He's going to assist me today and try to make sure I don't forget to tell you guys something about fabric. He's also going to help me move the fabric. Billy's been at Century for 45 years? 40 years. He didn't mean to make you older, Billy.
Yeah.
But he's been here 40 years and he spent all that whole time in cutting fabric, talking about fabric. And right now his job title is Quality Assurance Manager at Plant 2. So, he's the fabric guru for Century. All the plants come to Billy with questions. He's sort of the liaison between you guys and us. If you got a problem with the fabric, Billy's usually the guy that figures out how to make it work. So, very knowledgeable. Okay, the first thing we're going to start talking about today is the direction of fabric, and that's the way we cut it, the way we top it, the way you're going to see it, and why that makes a difference in your finished product. This is a non-directional fabric, which means it's plain. There's not a heavy grain, there's not a nap, there's nothing that makes us cut it in one direction or the other. So we can cut this depending on what SKU you pick. If it works better to cut it railroad, we'll cut it railroad. Railroad being we're topping it this way. Up the bolt means we're gonna top it that way. And if you order a bench seat sofa, well, Billy, can you help me with this? If you order a bench seat sofa, if we have a non-directional fabric, which there are very few of these days, we're gonna choose to cut it railroad. That means we can get the whole end back, the whole seat cushion, the whole seat out back, all in one piece. So you'll see no seams on your finished product when you receive your sofa, which is great. We can do it either way on this one. But this is railroad. This is when we'd be topping towards Billy, is what we'd be doing. We'd be able to cut this with no seams. That's why this is a great fabric. That's why we also have very few of them. This is a cross fabric also, and it looks very plain, but it is a nap fabric. It's actually a short mohair. Mohair, velvet, either one. Nap fabrics, we always cut them with the nap rubbing down. It helps it wear much better on the piece of furniture after you receive it. So it also keeps the shade the same. If you cut it the other way, you'll see a light and a dark arm if you're facing a velvet. So we always cut it down as our industry standard. Some people have requested that we cut a velvet railroad so they don't have seams in it, and we can do that. But the other very important part of this presentation is if you want something done out of the norm, there's CEU forms that we have that you can send in with your fabric that helps us tremendously get you what you're expecting when you order a piece of furniture. This works, like I said, it's an up the bolt, so on just, since this is an up the bolt fabric, man, that's cut perfect. You can see what's going to happen. We can't turn it this direction, so we're going to have to seam this fabric at salvage. Normally, upholstery fabrics are approximately 54 inches wide, so you can expect to seam about 27 inches from center on both sides. Like I said, that'll carry through on any piece you order that's over 54 inches wide. Headboards, sofas, love seats, sectional pieces. So that's where you're going to have your seaming at. So. This is an across balanced stripe. Used to be in the old days when me and Billy started cutting, we always ran stripes vertical. New wave of designers got a little more creative, and they'll run stuff horizontal. We have a designer here that on market samples, she ran horizontal on one half of the chair and vertical on the other side. So people get very creative. Again, the CEU form, if you've got any special direction. We're still old school, and we're still going to assume if you send a stripe in here, we're going to cut it vertical. So we're going to assume this is an up the bolt fabric, and we'll cut it that direction unless you tell us otherwise. We frequently get asked what makes a balanced stripe, and basically what you do is you pick out the center point of the fabric, and if you go both directions and it stays exactly the same, you see it goes gray, white, gray, then it's balanced. We'll show you an unbalanced stripe here in a second, and you can see the difference. See, when you go out from center, it changes. This, like I said, if we keep that consistency of running stripes vertical, this is going to be your typical railroad stripe, railroad fabric. So it's going to top this direction. So like I said, on the bench seat you saw before, on the cross fabric that had seams, won't have any seams on this one. But there are two applications that on railroad fabric you'll have seams where normally you wouldn't on the cross fabric. One is a chase cushion because of the depth. Now we have some that are shorter than 54 inches on the cushion and you won't have a seam in it, but most of the time you're going to have a seam at the back of this. You can see if we put it on the edge, you're hanging off 2 or 3 inches on the other side. If it's a tight back, you're going to see that. If it's a loose pillow back, sometimes it will hide, but sometimes it won't. Just want you to know up front on this railroad application, it's going to be on the chase lounges and the headboards. If you got a headboard higher than 54 inches tall, it's going to be the same deal. You're going to have a horizontal seam as low as we can put it, and like on the cushion, as far back as we can put it to be less noticeable. But railroad, that's the only time it adds a seam, where most of the time it takes away all your seams. Once again, this is a balanced stripe, just showing that if you go to the center of this fabric, then you go white, blue, green, blue, white. Obviously, it's like putting a mirror down in the center. It's going to look exactly the same from the center out in both directions. Works well on any of our fabric charts, especially this small of a repeat here. Don't have any problems lining everything up. We'll line the in back to the out back, in arms to out arms. That works really well. Makes a really nice piece of furniture. This is an unbalanced stripe. As you can see, if you go to the dead center of the fabric and you go out, say you start here, you got a lighter beige, a grayer look over here. Then it'll balance up in some places, but these are always going to be unbalanced. They're not going to hit. The reason that's important is if you cut this thing all topping in one direction, and then you go to put the out back on, when it matches the in back, it's not going to match. If you put top to top, you can see the colors are different. So what we can do on this one, because there's no nap, no design, no reason we can't flip it upside down on the outside pieces. And so obviously we can flip it upside down and it matches perfectly. So unbalanced stripes, if there's not a nap to it, if there's not a design under it, which we used to see in the past, don't see a lot anymore. We can flip it upside down, your piece comes in, everything matches perfectly, so looks good. Now this is an unbalanced stripe that has a nap to it, and if it's a really light nap and you can't see a big color difference, sometimes we'll flip that, but sometimes we can't flip it because there's a very significant change in color when you flip it over. So hope you can see that. But yeah, when it makes that dramatic of a difference, we don't flip it over. We just choose to let the stripes not line up perfectly. You'll have your center stripe that always hits, and it'll hit periodically as it goes out, but you'll have some colored stripes that won't line up perfectly on this. This is a balanced plaid, and plaids for the most part are just like stripes. If you have a balanced plaid, same deal. If you go to the center and work out, you'll see the stripes are identical, the same as you go. This one has to be balanced both ways though for everything to line up. It's got to be balanced on the stripes running railroad, just like the stripes running up the bolt. But this one, like I said, usually they're balanced both ways, but sometimes they're not. If they're not balanced both ways, it's sort of like the stripe. You'll get it hit in some stripes, but all the stripes will not hit. But works pretty good on your yardage chart unless it's a huge repeat. And for your reference, we have a PowerPoint that covers almost all of the information that we're covering here today. And it's got some really good pictures in there on the railroad and the cross and why you have a seam, why you don't have a seam. So I suggest if you can print off a copy and have it handy, or if you get a piece and you're not sure why there's a seam you weren't expecting, look back through it and hopefully it'll help you figure out why that's the case. one thing Billy's going to talk about now is you know, we talked about the direction of the fabric first. Now we're going to talk about the orientation, the pattern layout, and why it makes a difference. About all of these that Billy's going to look at, they're probably between 18 and 26-inch repeats, but you'll see why some of them are probably going to work real well with our yardage chart, and some of them are not. And hopefully if we call you one day and say, hey, you're 3 yards short, this will tell you a little bit of why. It can have the same repeat, but depending on the orientation of the layout and which SKU you pick to put on it, it can make a huge difference. So, okay, Bill.
No, that's some very good and valid points you just made. It's depending on the layout, the geometric layout of your design, as to whether you can use the same repeat without needing fabric. The example that we have laying here is just a 5-star, and to relate to it, you could just think of the number 5 on the dice, the top of the dice. It is generally laid out in that geometric design. It could be large or small. This has a very large repeat, which means we can alternate and go to this center repeat to get things that don't fit on the side or may piece. And by that we mean things like this chair cushion would normally, if you're going to center it a certain place, would end up hanging off the selvage, and you would need a seam here. We would also bounce that seam on the other side if necessary. Since you have a 5-star design, you can move those pieces to the center and not have to seam them. Also, you're able to use this design, things will fit better on the side, like your in arms or out arms, other pieces of the pattern. But depending on the size of this design and what the geometric layout is whether it's going to determine if we're going to have to piece or not. Right there, just a second. This design is a side-by-side, which if you think of railroad tracks, it just runs down the fabric just like that. There's nothing in the middle, and you have the spot on the side, which will cause seams on most cushions. Other pieces also sometimes back pillows with ears on them. There again, we'd match the seams. Because we can't go in the middle, there's nothing there. You're most likely not buying a fabric like this to see the blank background in the center. So that's another issue of why we have to seam side by sides. And that's just one of the geometric layouts that you see so often on the furniture you sell. This is another example of what looks like a side by side, but it's a half drop, because you see this bird is not the same bird over there. This bird goes all the way down here. Then it repeats again down this side. It completes up the roll that way, half drop. It goes from side to side, and it drops at each repeat. This one does have different birds that are going a different way that we will utilize if you prefer. That'll give you a better yield sometimes, but those are things that have to be specified on your COM sheet when you send that in. If not, we're going to spot everything on the same, keep it century standards, and give you a yield from that. Tell you what kind of yardage we need. Here we have an example of a down the middle, which is a single spot in the middle. That's the only one that is the same. It only repeats at the selvage, so you can't use that to spot anything on, of course, because you're not going to seam a cushion down the middle. It does have an alternating repeat that we could possibly use on other items like out arms and in arms, if you specify that on your COM sheet. If not, you need to do this on our fabric chart. You need to go to the 36-inch width to see your requirements. This is just some more examples from here out of different types of fabric and examples of why we need that information in your COM chart. This person said spot on the blue bird, and we got the fabric, and great, we have 4 or 5 blue birds. So you need to be more specific exactly which bird, even a photo or a diagram. Any of that in addition helps us to make sure we get your furniture where you want it and what you want on that furniture. This is also one that we could use an alternating bird to not have to piece. We can move, it's a 5-star also, which will give us that repeat. We could get arms from the side, but that again depends on the bird. If that's the bird you want, then we're going straight down the middle, as that bird doesn't appear anywhere that gives us enough room to get the pattern pieces.
That's also why when you send in and you want a yardage quote, you got a very expensive fabric, and you want to make sure you don't buy too much yardage. If you ask us to quote it for you, it's not so much, definitely the repeat makes a huge difference, and we need to know that repeat, but we need to know the layout of the fabric, whether it's a 5-star, whether it's a half drop, whether it's an up the middle. If you don't tell us that or don't give us, normally you can go to the mill's website and get a 54-inch square look that shows us the layout. If you can do that and get that to us, then we can do a good layout, a correct yardage. Otherwise, we're going to have to assume that you want this bird, and we're going to go right down the center, and you may send extra yardage that could be very expensive.
That is also a good point, that we need to know if that fabric is railroad or cross, because the yardage will be different on a cross fabric than it will a railroad. Sometimes it's very close, but it's a different amount of spots that you have to use going across, because you can only go so wide. This fabric is very unique, very colorful, something that a lot of people would probably like to use. And this is where we could use special instructions if you have them. If not, everything you get is going to be spotted on the same design, and you're going to come back and look at this fabric and think, wow, I like that design too. So that's great, we can do that. We could spot our cushion here, our pillow here, our out arms here on different designs, if you give us those instructions or that liberty to do so. That has to be on the CEU chart clearly, or we will give you efficiency and furniture spotted on the same spot that we pick if you don't designate one. Here we just actually have an example of bice welt, just a sheet of fabric marked out to show you how bice welt is cut and why when we are cutting bice welt on small stripes that require it, or if you ask for it, or our design calls for it, it usually will call for up to 1.5 yards of fabric per seating unit. So a chair is about 1.5 yards, sofa 3 yards, love seat about 2 yards of just welt. So that's where some of your yardage comes in for your total. This was an example of a fabric that Tim found that he was really surprised with, and surprised us all, and that is because it just spots right down the middle, nowhere else. It has 3 different spots on it, here, here, and here, but they only repeat in the same place on the roll. So you're still going down the middle of the roll to get everything spotted. You might find some smaller parts that would fit over here, but it's a different spot, and we're not going to use that unless you've verified that that's what you want, different spots. This is an example of the type yardage that it requires to cut a bench cushion that is not being pieced at 54, that is flowing back. And this one is pieced 3 times. You have a center part of your cushion, you have a left side of your cushion, and a right side of your cushion. We could use 1 less repeat if this is seaming at 54, because you only have to go down twice per cushion, top or bottom. We just wanted to show an example of how a repeat can either be spotted or carried through and change the amount of seams that could show on that product.
Yeah, a perfect example of that, and we do get this request, and we do have some of our styles, the Highland House line, request that they match the back pillows. If you have 3 back pillows, then we're going to seam it where the break is in the back cushions. And so if you do that, the reason we want to show you guys is if it's normally this way and you request us to match the breaks in the back pillows, it's going to take 1 more repeat. See, we would be done here on a 54-inch piece out. You get a piece out here and a piece out over there, and you sew it back to the one big piece here. This one, you got to come here to get this one because you're breaking it not at salvage. And the other thing I don't think I mentioned before is most of our fabrics, upholstery fabrics, curtain fabrics, salvage to salvage. If you sew them together right on the salvage, it makes a full design, so it looks like the repeat just keeps going. And so that's why we can get both these piece outs on the 54-inch piece out in one spot right here, but while we can't here because we're changing where that piece out is. So you have to go pretty much staggered back and forth down the middle. But, and if you think about this, if you're thinking about a tight back and a out back and a seat and a cushion, you're talking about 5 different repeats that you're gonna have to add to the yardage. So if it's a 27-inch repeat, you're gonna add 4 yards of fabric just by wanting to piece it where the brakes are in the back pillar.
Along that same line, Tim, there are questions sometime as to why we're asking for additional, and our comment will come back something similar to, because everything goes down the center. Sometimes when a fabric does not repeat back at the selvage, it causes all the piece outs to come out of the center also, and is causing this extra yardage needed. When we say it goes down the center, that means we're not able to flow it back at the selvage, like Tim was mentioning.
Another issue we run into quite frequently is people will call in and they'll ask why on a certain chair that their fabric doesn't line up perfectly. As you can see on vertical stripes, how it comes in at V's. And it's normally on barrel chairs. And barrel chairs typically are bigger at the top than they are at the bottom. So it's sort of like a tapered man's shirt, where you'll see the same thing if you look at a man's shirt underneath. It's because it's getting smaller as it goes down to be a better fit. If we don't do that, then when you get to the bottom of the sofa or chair, barrel chair, you're gonna have to gather that fabric in some fashion. Obviously that's not a good look. So we have to taper it, and you can see how when they're cut, you know, if you follow the stripe line, you'll see the gap that we have to cut in it to get rid of the excess fabric at the bottom. Now on the inside of this chair, barrel chairs, you have the same issue, but the cutout's gonna look a little bit different because you'll have a bunch of fabric that gathers in the middle when you have a barrel chair because of the curve. It's more of the curve here, and it's more the smaller at the bottom here, more of the taper going here. We do tie it in one spot, and you can see that it makes a full design right here on the lady's body, but looks like she has 2 heads when you get above it because it's flaring out back here, so it's going to do a double take when it gets to the top. It'll do the same thing at the bottom. But we can only hit in one spot. We try to do like where our spot point would be, the center focus of that end back. But there's nothing we can do about that, because if we don't do that, you're gonna have a whole bunch of wrinkles in the middle of that end back. So a lot of people don't understand that and wonder why it's that way. A lot of people think on this, well, if you just keep the stripes going straight, what difference is it gonna make? Well, when you get to the front outside of that chair, they're gonna be leaning back at about a 30-degree angle at whatever the angle is on that pattern. So it looks really unattractive, might be the best word there.
Sure. Kind of gives it a barber pole effect.
One other thing, round fronts, curved fronts, people a lot of times don't understand either. The same deal as you can see the curved pieces here, you can only tie it in one spot. You can only do that on this cushion in the very center. That's the only place it's going to tie in perfectly. Obviously, as you're cutting that design off up here, it's going to go away. It's not going to follow that, and we have to keep this border straight. So it's not going to tie in all the way. This is a really curved piece, but you'll see it on less curved pieces also. But that's why it doesn't fill out all the way across the front of the sofa or the chair. This is an example of that railroad stripe fabric we showed you, and also that same exact bench cushion we showed you on why you have seams and up the bolt. This one obviously is the railroad, so it does not have seams. We did cut the welt straight on here, but normally on a very small repeat stripe, we'll bias that. You know, we showed you why bias welt takes a little more fabric. And sometimes if you send a very small stripe in here, we'll tell you we need an extra 2 yards of fabric because we're going to bias the welt. We need to make it line up the way it should. We did bias the welt on the bottom here, and we do it for 2 or 3 reasons. One of them is because it's a very small repeat stripe. Another reason is because it's a silk type fabric. Silk type fabrics tend to bunch up when you sew it and apply welt cord in certain applications. If we have a job that's round, like the cushion we showed you before, If it takes weld in it, bias welt flexes much better than this because it stretches. If you think about the threads in a fabric going horizontal and vertical, so if you stretch it diagonally, it's got a lot more give and a lot more flex, and it goes into round applications much better. The horizontal stripes, very hard to keep them from rolling, looking like a barber pole as you sew it. So we will take a horizontal stripe and automatically bias that welt. And this is one we wanted to show you. We told you that salvage to salvage, these fabrics will tie back in and make a perfect design. Yeah, a lot of people think seams are going to be ugly and think I don't want to seam on my sofa, but actually, these seams, if you about can't see it from 6 feet away, you have to get up on top of it to see the seam, and we always top stitch or saddle stitch the seam unless you request us not to. Gives it a little more strength, and I think it adds to the looks. But you can see these match perfectly. Like I said, from a distance you can't even tell it's seamed, but that's the way all of our piece outs do. Hopefully you guys found this helpful and learned, probably the main points are learning the difference in the orientation of the fabric, whether we're going to cut it up the bolt or whether it's going to be a railroad. Number two, hopefully you learned how important the COM form is, and the more information you can send us, the better off your furniture is going to get to you correctly and also much quicker. Sometimes if we don't have the information, it sits in here waiting on a customer service person to get in touch with you and get back in touch with us. So yeah, that COM form can save you some time and some heartache. Thirdly, hope you can tell the difference in the orientation of the fabric, whether it's a 5-star, whether it's a half drop, whether it's down the middle. Obviously, they all take different yardages depending on the layout of the fabric. So hopefully you'll understand if we call you back and say, hey, this is a down the middle fabric, we're going to need 5 more yards. Hopefully you understand why now. Bias welt, why it takes more yardage. And if we cut something to match a break in the cushions instead of doing a 54-inch piece out, why it takes more fabric for that too. Appreciate you guys joining us. Hope you learned something, and take care.